IVM.
Hello and welcome to Simplified. We continue our special episode with a very special guest, Dr. Nitin Arora, who is an intensivist based in the UK. We had a great session where we discussed various parts of the workings of ICUs as well as the life of an intensivist. We'll continue that conversation today with a bit more about how medical oxygen is used, how it works, how it's applied, all the details about that. So thank you, Dr. Arora, for continuing with us today. And Naren, do you want to take us away with the first question?
No, before Naren does that, I have another stupid joke to make, because we have a doctor from the because we have a doctor from the UK who's talking about oxygen. We must say that this is the O2 arena part of the. It was there. We had to do it. Now let's out of the way.
It was right there.
Right there.
Yeah, actually, when we, on the rare occasion that we miss these cheap jokes, we agonize for days on end for losing the opportunity because that opportunity was particularly sad. That's fine. Yeah. So what we would like to talk about is we've got the oxygen to the hospital. How do you get it into the lungs of the patient? So that's basically what Nitin is going to talk about. Yeah.
Brilliant. Right. So basically, we've talked about how oxygen's got to the wall or the cylinders now next to the patient's bed. And we can come back to cylinders later. So then what you're looking at is, what does the patient need? So you have obviously done oxygen saturations on the patient, but you also have to think about why does the patient need oxygen? Is it a pneumonia? Is it heart failure? Or is something else going on? Have they just had carbon monoxide poisoning? Have they had cyanide poisoning? Something, who knows what? So what you need to know is why you're giving the oxygen rather than the knee-jerk reflex of oxygen saturations are low, let's give more oxygen. Then you have to decide on a target. And I think everyone's heard now that the target for oxygen for a sick patient typically is around 90-92% saturations. Whereas if you and I are walking around, people have possibly 98-99%. And then I've heard on social media people saying, we are just doing this may harm patients, but we are doing this to conserve oxygen. Actually, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that these saturation targets are better. When I was starting out, patient would come in with a heart attack, we would give them 50 liters oxygen. Now we give them sometimes no oxygen at all, sometimes just a bit of oxygen, just enough to get the saturations up to about 93, 94. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that any more than that is harmful. And we can come back to why harmful, because we don't know for sure, but there are theories. It's the same with ventilated patients. So about 24 years ago, there was a big study in America where they tried to do two different things. They tried to compare two arms. This was called the ARMA study or the ARDS ventilator volume study. What they did was they ventilated one group with 10 mils per kilo of tidal volume. Ventilated or 12 mils. The other group with 6 mils per kilo. The 6 mils per kilo group was, so what they found was over 2 days, the first 2 days, and they did regular analysis of blood gases. They found in the first 2 to 3 days, the patients who were ventilated with high tidal volumes and unrestricted pressures versus low tidal volumes and pressure restricted at a reasonable level. The high tidal volume group, they had much better gases. They were getting much better oxygen. They were clearing their CO2. They were looking a lot better by day 3. By day 6, the situation had reversed. By day 21, twice as many people in the high tidal volume group had died. Why? Because that is where the concept came to the forefront. The people had talked about it for years. The concept hadn't ever come into the forefront, which is your lungs are composed of about 1 million small sacs, thin-walled sacs called alveoli, which is where gas exchange happens. What is pneumonia or ARDS? Some of these alveoli get inflamed. They get filled with inflammatory crud, pus, if you will, and so they cannot participate in gas exchange. So you have, half of the lung is not working at the moment. The other half is working. Then you try and stretch these alveoli by giving them high tidal volumes and high pressure. So you get what we call volutrauma and barotrauma. The easiest way to describe it is take a balloon. You inflate it a little bit, let it go. Inflate a little bit, let it go. You can do that 20 times. You inflate it full, overinflate it, and then let it go. When it comes back, it doesn't come back to its original shape. It's lost its elasticity. So it now has plastic changes rather than elastic changes. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. That's a beautiful analogy. That's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah. So once you overcome the elasticity of these alveoli, these are living structures, so they will also get inflamed. So essentially what you're doing is you're causing trauma to your lungs. And we started calling this
ventilator-induced
lung injury.
Yeah, that is so non-intuitive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Which is the same thing. So, which is what I was saying, that in ICU, what we've learned over the last 25 years is less is more. So whatever you try to do to correct the numbers in the short term may have unforeseen long-term effects.
Wow. Like, I mean, the concept of a patient who looks better after 4 days but may end up dead after 21 days is absolutely, I mean, that requires experience to understand. You can't.
So one of the things that stands out is someone decided to do a study. It's non-intuitive. So someone sensed this and decided to do a study to verify it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of things that we are doing in the last 20 years are non-intuitive. But we know this works because we've done these large studies. I mean, in a typical year in my ICU, we admit about 2,300 patients. If we do not enroll at least 600 or 700 of them into various research trials, we have failed.
Right.
Because there is so much that we do not understand. So we have to try and get more knowledge.
Actually, this could so easily become an episode on evidence-based medicine, because you take nothing for granted and you just keep testing all your theories all the time.
Oh, obviously, there is no other way to do it.
Yeah.
And
there is no other way to do it.
Yeah. And also on that note about how that entire concept of less is more, about whether it is oxygen, whether it is antibiotics, whether it's about any kind of, I mean, the whole thing about, I was just seeing another video about how a lot of privileged people who have like oxygen saturation at 99 or 98 are getting medication for whatever, remdesivir and all that other stuff, which they're just taking indiscriminately, and then that is leading them to either too many steroids are leading to whatever, the black fungus infections or high spiking blood sugar and all the other ailments that are coming accordingly, which has become a major thing. So understanding when certain medication is required, and not everything can be prophylactic, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And again, if I can make a tangential point here, when I started doing this, there was a move away from calling this intensive care unit and to call them intensive treatment units.
Right. Okay? Yeah.
And 10 years ago, we changed the name back because it's not the treatment, it's the care. There are no magic bullets. It is the care. It is attention to detail.
That is
keeping everyone
such
on
a
the
subtle
straight and narrow.
Difference. Yeah.
And we see our duty as care not to just the patients, but to the families as well. On a typical day, every single day, our families of our patients will get, during COVID times, they'll get phone calls, but earlier we have open visiting. So families can visit 2 people at a bedside 24/7 whenever they want. And if someone is predicted to die in the next 24 hours or so, we move them into a side room, and then they can have 5 or 6 family members in there as well. So we have very open visiting, and every day, the families get to ask as many questions as they want, and we give them a detailed update every day. So the care doesn't just extend to the patients, it extends to their families as well.
I have to just add one point here. So when my dad was in the ICU, we were allowed, because I knew the people, but most relatives had to wait outside and they would get their information only from the staff. So that was one. Second, one of my close friends got COVID. He went to he survived. So they did an excellent job. They saved him. They came back. He went into a crisis. They took him to a municipal facility, and he's like sort of half his family is in Canada. He's here, and they weren't able to find out what was happening to him because he was in the ICU in this facility, locked out. So they reached out to us, his friends. We went there. And they told us that you can't get in, you can't say anything. The only information we can tell you is whether he is alive or dead. It was brutal, I tell you.
That is
every morning you go and he says, no, he's still alive. That's it.
Yeah, that is unfortunate.
We need to work on that in India.
Yeah.
Just on the subtle difference between treatment and care, right? And how there are no magic bullets. What we see constantly on social media is like requests from, relatives who are trying for the best for the patient, requesting, things like plasma or remdesivir or any of these other treatments. How does that come into being? Is that like, does that get passed on from the doctor, or is it just,
I don't know. We used remdesivir, plasma. We used hydroxychloroquine on 100 patients in my unit. But we used all of these medications, all of these therapies only as parts of a research study. Right. So, all the evidence that we have from in the UK, we were part of the recovery trial, which everyone's heard of now. And we were also part of REMAP-CAP. So every single COVID patient that came to us, we tried to enroll them in a study, and 90% of the families agreed to enroll them into studies, or if the patients were still conscious, they agreed. So it was humbling to see that families, when you told them, we do not know what works, but we are going to try and find out, this may not help your patient. But then again, if you are not in the study, we're not going to give you this drug anyway. But there is a 50% chance, because you may be randomized and it is a double-blind study. So I don't know what I'm giving the patient. So they might be getting the drug, or they might be getting just saline injections. I don't know. No one knows. Because the blinding is opened only at the end of the study. So we don't know. But it was humbling that very, very few patients and families said no. And if you are actually open and honest and say, we are not sure, but we are trying to find out, and this may not help you, but this may help other people in the future.
Yeah.
Most people just say yes.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yeah.
I think in India, it's on the opposite side of the spectrum where, you feel compelled to try something because not trying something feels like, there's a certain guilt trap involved. And so people having to source their own medication seems a little crazy, right? Like you have to request.
Unfortunately, it does. And actually, when I was brand new resident, my boss in intensive care, he had his favorite saying. He used to say, don't run and do something, just stand there, which is the opposite of what most people try and do. Because most people will say, don't stand there, run and do something.
Run and do something, yeah.
No, the rule of intensive care is don't run and do something. Stand there and think first. Unless it's a genuine emergency, in which case, yes.
This is almost Zen-like in its wisdom, because it applies to a lot of real-life things. Sometimes oftentimes you just need to reflect for a little bit and then decide on what is that slow and fast thing.
It is absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of my intensive care friends, they are huge fans of that book. Everyone has that book. Everyone I know has that book. And again, there is an intensivist on Twitter, Matt Soba, who runs a website which is called The Zen Intensivist. A lot of us have contributed to it. So he goes around the world giving talks on how to be a Zen intensivist. So I found it interesting that you just said that, Naren.
It's life, and it's one of the things that an intensivist will see rather more of than other doctors is death, and it does affect you. And I've seen, my father's a doctor, and he was pretty strong guy. He was a family physician, and he had a huge practice. So but every now and then, when a patient died, he would just come home, and we knew that he was upset, and he would just sit and not say a word. And he was a very garrulous kind of a person, so it was unusual to see him like that. So, and that's most doctors I know. They never let on what's going inside their head. So here I'm going to ask you, how does death affect you in general and in particular when someone you care, it's a particularly sad case?
Yeah. So when I was a medical student in India, this is what we were taught. what I have learned over the last 15, 20 years is, so about, in an average year, about 20% of my patients will die. So it varies somewhere between 18 and 22% year to year, but call it 20%. So 1 in 5 of all of my patients will die. Wow. But what will happen is half of my admissions are surgical, elective surgical. So, and there, most of them don't die, and most of them only stay for 2 days. So the people, and so you are not going to remember the names and faces of people that have only stayed for 2 days. And so the other half, now you're thinking, okay, of the other half, probably 40%. So of the others, about 40% of them are going to die. And these are the people that are going to stay in hospital for a few days. You're going to talk to them. You're going to talk to their families every day. And so you will remember their faces. So sometimes it's easy to forget that only 20% of your patients die and the other 80% survive, whereas in the 1970s, they would have all died. Yeah. So I hate saying you've saved lives. What you've done is you've extended people's lives by, 2 years, 5 years, possibly even 50 years. No one has ever saved a life because everyone's going to die. Yeah. But what you've done is you've postponed death for a bit. However, the names and faces that you will remember will all be dead people. And what I have found, and what a lot of us have found, is actually if you can feel true empathy, and if you can talk to the family, and about personally, when I'm discussing death with families, I cry with them about 1 in 4 times. So instead of locking the emotion out, you let it in and let it pass through you, and then it passes through you, and then you piss it out later in the evening. Whereas if you try and block it, it sits in your throat and chokes you for the next few days. That wasn't meant to be profane, but this is how I talk.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it wasn't profane. It was profound. It was profound, if anything. Yeah. So,
medicine is that very, very unusual profession. Most of us, we do not see more than 1 or 2 deaths in our lifetime. Yeah. And here, absolutely the same, same species is seeing death every single day. It does, it does. Yeah. And like PTSD, there must be, so they do have a little defense mechanism. They tend to be a little profane about it. They tend to be, you tend to make jokes about death. It's like I have a surgeon friend who actually did a trauma intestine surgery and then went and ate spaghetti arrabbiata after that, which was pretty much the same you were operating on. Okay, you're eating the same thing 15 minutes later. So yeah, it sort of hardens you in some ways.
Yeah, there must be some very interesting dark jokes that are passed in some ICU doctor WhatsApp groups, I'm guessing. But doctor, let me take Naren's question, and thank you for sharing that, because that seemed like a very personal thing. So let me take the sunshine of that, which is when the lives are saved, the 80% as it were, does the flip side of that happen? Do you share the joy as well?
Yep. One of my hobbies is I do. I run, or actually I haven't for the last 18 months, but before that, I used to run an ICU follow-up clinic. So patients come back, families come back. And one of the joys of my life is seeing these patients that were completely broken coming back. It takes time. About 20% of our discharged patients have some sort of PTSD, which is very similar to military veterans. And actually, there's some research work now going on which shows that intensive care doctors and nurses have similar amounts of PTSD as well. And that is, it feels really good. And we encourage the families and healed patients that are coming back. We encourage them to visit the unit and talk to the members of staff that looked after them, because we found that it is incredibly great for morale. Mm-hmm. You see your results, and it feels amazingly good. And then obviously patients tell you stories, and then you remember the stories, and then you think, okay, maybe we could do something different next time. On the topic of death, I've actually in the chat box, I've just shared a blog I wrote a few years ago. So at some point, have a little look if you want.
Yeah, and we'll link it out as well. And Doctor, something that you said resonated with me. So while I've been fortunate enough not to be in an ICU myself, I was in a very bad car accident almost exactly 10 years ago, and I had a hip replacement surgery done. And I make it a point to go back to my surgeon every few years just to have a look at how the X-ray is doing. And the last time I went, which is about a year or so back, he was having a look at my femur's X-ray, and you could see this pride in his face. Right? It's like, this is a work of art which I did. And he was just saying, and he was like, oh wow, because one, it is very rare for him to have done a surgery on such a young person. I was 26 when I had that surgery, but it was a pretty bad crash. So the hip replacement was the only way to go. And he was like, oh, this thing has the body has accepted the implant, and it's like you could see the joy in his face. And I just kept quiet. I just wanted him to revel in his own art for some time. So yeah, I can totally understand what you say when you say it's amazing when patients or survivors in some way.
Yeah, and on the flip side. On the flip side, it's almost like, so my father a few years ago actually had, well before COVID, a few years ago, had swine flu, and he's in his 70s, he has asthma, so swine flu is pretty dangerous for him as such. And the thing being, we have a family doctor, and he's an amazing doctor. He's also renowned. I mean, for a family doctor, he's been the coldest doctor we've ever had, right? We go to him, he sees us, he says, how you doing? And then he checks you out and he gives you clinically the medication, and we're done. Like, we've seen him for 20 years and we've never gotten a word out of him. He just sees us and he's like, good. Like, he makes time for us. He's a great doctor, but nothing beyond that. And we've gotten used to that. Like, okay, that's how a doctor is. He gives you your 5 minutes and then you are out the door. And my dad was, again, he had a bit of a breathing problem and all that. And the doctor said, okay, the season's up. The tests weren't done yet. And he said, the season's happening, so might as well start taking Tamiflu well ahead of before. I mean, it's before your result comes up, you better start taking Tamiflu. And then 24 hours later, the test came in and he actually did have swine flu. And when the doctor came to visit, and I was very conscious of my doctor coming, because again, I knew that he is always clinical. He does his 5 minutes and leaves, and Dad was in the hospital. So I was ready with all my facts down. I was like, okay, I need to ask my questions. The man comes and asks, how is your dad doing? And I'm like, that's not par for course. I'm not used to this. And he's shaking. He can't put his gloves on because this is a patient he's seen for 20 years. And for the first time, I saw emotion in this doctor because he thought that he prescribed something out of his medical knowledge, but it's actually come true, and he faces the prospect of losing a patient he's known for 20 years. And that's where I finally saw that, oh, this guy is a human being, he's not just a doctor. So that was something that really struck me about how doctors may hide their emotion on some level, but they're actually actually resonate with it in the most unexpected ways sometimes.
Absolutely. Yes.
So one more related questions for you, since you've practiced medicine on both sides. I was touched to know that you share in the grief, or you express your grief, even though you're a medical professional, and it is you are a human being at that point of time, and that's fine. In India, when you were practicing, and you would have seen very, very, very little of this, is that the thing, or would it be seen as weak of the doctor to break down? Is there a cultural thing? Yeah. Would you be it's okay for you to express your grief, the grief that you feel as a human being, and all of us feel that at different points, inexplicable. That's the way grief operates, and you express it, and that's generally therapeutic, because when you express grief, it sort of soothes you somewhere inside, and then you move on, because that's life. But in India, it is usually seen as a sign of weakness. And I would assume, I don't know, but Nitin has worked on both sides, so he probably has a better idea. Would it be seen as a weakness to express grief? I've seen very few doctors express grief. That's why I asked.
So what I think, what I would say to that is, when I was training in India, it was, and from what I hear, even people of a similar age in this country, it was seen as a sign of weakness in the doctor. However, I like to think that things have changed. They've changed probably a little bit faster over here. They've changed slightly slower in India. But the guys, Because as I said, every year we get 2 or 3 clinical fellows coming from India who stay with us for 2 or 3 years, and they've trained in India for 8-9 years. So they're pretty experienced doctors, and they finished their intensive care specialization. And I think things are changing in India now. And I'll tell you why I think things are changing a little bit in India is because. When this COVID thing started, the second wave in India, when we had subsided, so I put together a group of 60 intensivists of Indian origin. They had to speak an Indian language. They had to understand Indian conditions across the US, Australia, and the UK. And we then liaised with the Indian Society of Critical Care to set up a helpline, partly for patients, but mainly for doctors. And we went through all of these countries just to cover all the time zones, just like we were talking about this morning. So we could cover all the time zones. And most of us have been spending 2-3 hours every day on this helpline for the last month. So it's like working a second job. And half of the phone calls have been from doctors, and they have talked about pretty raw stuff. So I think that is changing in India as well. I suspect that so far, where we've got is they're expressing their grief, they're expressing their raw emotion, perhaps to a stranger at the end of a phone line. I suspect they may not be as comfortable discussing this directly with their boss, but they might discuss this with their friends, especially after a beer. And I am almost sure that we haven't got to a stage where it is acceptable to discuss this, to display emotional grief. You definitely, you never dream of loading a patient with your guilt or with your grief, but expressing grief with the patient or their family, I suspect is getting more acceptable, but I suspect we're not quite there yet, but we will get there. At least we've taken a few steps down the road. When I was training, you wouldn't discuss this with a colleague. You wouldn't phone a helpline. You wouldn't ask for peer support. So things have definitely started changing. They're not where we would like them to be, but nothing is what we would like it to be. But it's better than it used to be.
Is there a function of the times that you're obviously seeing way more, I would say, morbid stuff than you used to before, or is it a cultural shift in itself?
I think it's everything, but I suspect that this was changing before COVID, because the guys that we are seeing over the last few years, they are more open to expressing their emotions and discussing stuff. So I think this is a cultural shift in society, in that we're talking more about our emotional health.
And I think that's what it is. It's incredibly kind of of your group to run a helpline for this. First, to recognize that it is a need, and then taking the trouble and time and effort to provide for that something. Yeah.
Gosh, we are very grateful to the Indian Society for Critical Care, because they looked after the IT solution. They set it up. We offered. So first we asked them, what do you need? Do you need money, resources? And they said, look, donate to food charities. We don't need more equipment. And because equipment distribution is a major problem, there are no commercial flights. So it'll have to go through the government channels, and distribution, getting the equipment to the right place will be a major problem. So they said, donate to food charities, because these patients that are coming in from distant areas to big cities, their families are sitting outside because they're not allowed in the room, and they are struggling for food. So we have been donating to food charities. And then the only other thing they said was, yes, can you do a peer support or a peer network helpline? And we put this group together. It happened very quickly. And within 72 hours, they'd set up an IT solution. So you can log in, you can indicate your availability for 30 minutes to 3 hours, whatever you want. And anyone that goes to the website, and they're tweeting it out regularly, will see who is available. So you just click on it and you get connected.
Wow.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm sort of like, we've taken way more of your time than we should have, Doctor. And definitely is the longest that
I've enjoyed talking.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure we can go on talking for much, much longer as well. I have two sort of final questions from my side anyway, to sort of like wrap up. One is very specific to intensive care and one slightly broader. So the first one, I was doing a little bit of reading up for another episode which involves the brain in some way. I was just reading about Neuralink and Elon Musk's adventures over there, and I came across this quote from a Harvard professor of biology called Jeff Lichtman, who was talking about how much humans actually know about the brain right now. We think that we know a lot, but the quote, and it's beautiful. So he starts off his courses by asking his students the question: if everything you need to know about the brain is a mile, how far have you walked in this journey? And students would say like 3/4, half a mile. And he said the real answer is 3 inches. Which shows how much you know about the brain. What would the distance be for intensive care right now? And I thought of this question when you were talking about the balloon analogy that you were using, saying that we still have so much more to go in this. That's question number one, really. And question number two is maybe on a slightly more optimistic note to sort of end this is, have you seen you've interacted with so many doctors, nurses, and across geographies, I'm guessing also. Do you think that this entire that COVID, while we are living through a very, very bad time right now, and none of us really wish that it happened, do you think that the medical profession has sort of will benefit from this, not just from a knowledge point of view, but will it be like what science itself was after the moon landing in the 1960s, where you had a generation of kids wanting to take up science and engineering and seeing that, oh, wow, okay, I want to get into this profession and get into helping my fellow human beings. So one very specific question and one slightly broad, maybe philosophical question for you to end, I guess.
Okay. So can I answer the first one first? Yeah. So the you said, a mile, 3 inches. What I'm going to say is, to know how far you have to go or how far you have come, you first have to have some idea of scale. We have no idea of scale.
We have no idea.
I know we walked 3 inches, but I don't know whether the total journey is half a mile or 25 miles. I have no idea. I don't think anyone does. But someone really smarter than me, one of my colleagues who's the smartest person, one of the smartest people I know, Professor David Menon, who's interestingly from Chennai, who's a professor of neurointensive care at Cambridge. He says that he has no idea how far we have to go either. So I definitely can't tell you how far we have to go. The second one, which is actually easier for me, I think, is where are we going with healthcare? I think there's going to be a number of advantages, a number of things that come out of this. And I think that I am going to compare this to the Second World War rather than the moon landings, if that's okay.
Yeah.
The moon landings were a peaceful mission. This was a deadly problem, an emergency. And there are a few things that have come out of it. One is, I think the importance of research has been doubly highlighted. It's been easier to recruit to clinical trials, and I'm hoping that, and what's happened is with social media and with the whole world getting affected by this whole thing altogether, we've built up lots of worldwide networks. So we are currently doing a survey, a study on visiting practices in intensive care across all of Asia, across 32 countries, and the difference between pre-COVID times and the COVID times. And 5 years ago, how would I build a network of 32 people in 32 different countries? It's just not possible. It's just because in the last year, the way we learn, the way we interact, the way we network has changed. And just because I've been on Zoom webinars teaching at different places with a lot of these people, suddenly not a lot of people, you have their emails in your inbox, and you can then email all of them and say, guys, are you interested in this? It will be quick, and I think it will be informative, and then we can decide what is best practice here. You can build up a research network. You can do what you want. You can build a support network. Recruitment. Already this year, we got 3 times more young doctors applying to intensive care than we've ever had before in the UK in the last year, at least. So I hope that will continue in a lot of places. So I suspect, yes, recruitment will work. I think we've learned new ways of doing things, like the mRNA technology vaccine. It was developed in 3 days. I think. Was it 3 days or something?
Yeah. So the story goes, 2 days later after the DNA was sent from Wuhan, Moderna had it.
Yeah. So they had done a computer model of the vaccine.
Computer model, sorry. Yes, that's what I meant.
Yeah. So it's revolutionized how we do things. And even with the adenovirus vaccines, previous vaccines took 10 years. This vaccine took very short time, obviously, because there were so many patients. So they were able to do thousands of patients in the clinical trial very, very quickly. So I think, and if there is one thing that I would like to come out of this is two things, actually. One, we need to persuade governments, and I hope governments across the world will be persuaded that a lot of places in the world need more healthcare resources. On the other hand, as an intensivist, this will sound very perverse, but the biggest bang for buck is in primary care and in preventive care rather than intensive care. When drunk, I tell people that I work in expensive care. It's not expensive for the patients, but it's the bed for bed. It costs 10 times more to run an ICU bed than a standard hospital bed.
Absolutely.
So this is not the bang for buck care. This is where you go to when you're in trouble. So you need it. Okay. So this is like having special forces. Special forces soldiers need more training. They need a lot more work. And as you know, in special forces, within their own teams, they have less hierarchy of rank and they tend to be more informal. I like to think of intensive care as special forces, but they are expensive. You don't want too many of them. What you want is you want diplomacy to prevent wars, and you want public health and primary care rather than an outsized focus on intensive care. And this we've noticed in the media in this country. So I was in 3 different BBC documentaries and lots of radio programs. Lots of my colleagues actually got more exposure than we did. But actually, our colleagues in medicine and our colleagues in emergency medicine probably saw 10 times as many COVID patients as we did, because, only a 10th of patients admitted to hospital would need to come to ICU. But they never really got any acknowledgement. So somehow the media made heroes out of intensive care just because it looks bright, shiny, and the machines go beep. So I think what we need is we need a much bigger focus on primary care and public health and preventive stuff.
Absolutely.
Well said. All right. I can't think of any way to, you can't better. There's no way to follow up on that really. So at least from me.
So
absolutely, yes.
I really that one thing is exactly what is happening here. Everyone is bemoaning the lack of intensive care in India and blaming that for the damage that the pandemic is causing. But it is really an enormous lack of primary healthcare infrastructure that is probably more worthy of action.
I mean, that's what, right? Like you mentioned, the machines that go beep and the scrubs and the filters look sexier than washing your hands and wearing a mask.
That's it. Yes, absolutely. And India has to be more careful than the bigger economies or the more developed economies in where we spend our money. So we need bang for buck.
Yeah. Absolutely,
Extensive care, not
extensive.
I love that. Extensive care, not expensive care.
That's incredible. Wow, that was incredible. So this has been genuinely one of the finest episodes we've done on Simplified.
I'm so
glad. I'm so glad it arrived from a bad episode that we did.
We should do more bad episodes.
I will say it was a great episode. I just felt it was an incomplete episode in that we left it off hanging at the climax.
Doctor, the problem was we walked 3 inches. We didn't know how far we had.
Beautiful.
We had no idea whatsoever. And I should have, because my dad spent time in an ICU and I got to see all this up front. And all I could think about was oxygen, not the rest of all that.
Don't be too hard on yourself, because what happens is when you are there, your cognitive load is so high anyway. So your emotional load impairs your cognitive ability, and your cognitive load's already high enough. You're getting sensory overload. You're not used to all of this. So it is normal. Don't be hard on yourself.
Good.
Okay, can I ask one last question? Sorry for bringing it up at the last minute. Do you think that, you've spent so much time with us, you spend so much time with other doctors and, teaching them and stuff. This is practically like spending time with backbenchers for you. But is there a limit to empathy, or do you see that the more empathetic you get, the farther you can go on being empathetic?
Okay, so can I say two things? One is, actually, part of my role is public engagement with intensive care. So actually, I'm loving this. And I go with our organ donation leads to gurudwaras and temples regularly, and we talk to people. So you explain intensive care and organ donation in Punjabi, in Hindi. And we have a Gujarati intensivist as well, so in Gujarati as well. So I love talking to non-medics. Actually, in some ways, it's non-medics bring. I know I shouldn't define a group by a non, but you know what I mean.
You can call us engineers, I think.
You have a very different view. You have a different point of view. And honestly, when I start, already I can think of a few things, but when I start reflecting on this and when I listen to the episode, I think I will find I've learned just as much from you, because it's a different point of view. And it is the diversity in the team with people having different points of view that actually gives you brainwaves later. You may not realize it then, but 3 months later. So I have loved this. The second bit, which you asked about empathy, I would honestly say there isn't a limit. And if you feel you're getting to your limit, take a break.
Yeah.
It is the most important, one of the most important challenges is for people to recognize the limits of their own resilience and the limits of their mental health and make sure they look after them. Because what you don't want is the doctor who has a bottle of vodka under the back seat and takes a slug before they can, steel themselves to walk into work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I've heard it referred to as the empathy gym, which means that you can train your muscles, but also you need the rest day, which is even more important. So,
perfect.
But it's great for us to have this video chat with you, because you just put us at so much comfort, and the empathy just shines through, which is why I thought it was important to ask that question. Thank you so much for spending all this time.
Close to 2 hours.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. So Naren, you want to sign us off?
Yeah, I want to just say once again, totally thank you. And we usually sign off our Simplified with some silly stay safe slogan. So our slogan today is, and I make it up, and everyone politely laughs. So my slogan for today is stay safe, stay intensive, and stay intense and stay simplified.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks so much. Thank you,
Thank you very much. It's been fantastic to talk to all of you. Thank you.
This is really great.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Super.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Cred and Sia. Thank you so much for making this possible. We've had an amazing week on the network. Do check out The Note with Mahrukh Inayat. She speaks to Prabhat Kumar, the man leading child protection at one of India's leading NGOs, Save the Children. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Rajat Mittal Shah to talk about some superfoods in Ayurveda like turmeric and ashwagandha. On Paisa Vaisa, host Anupam Gupta has a digital gold special in 2 parts, one with Ashraf Rizvi, founder and CEO of Digital Swiss Gold, and Gilded, and one with Deepak Abbott, co-founder of India Gold. Listen to the first part of the Father's Day special of Agla Station Adulthood with Natasha and her father, Dr. Vipul Roy Rathod. You should also check out Cyrus Says' episode with Mukul Chadda. He talks about upcoming shows Sunflower and Sherni. Our Kannada podcast, Thale Artist, celebrates 100 episodes, and we had a reunion of hosts Pawan, Ganesh, and Surya who shared their favorite moments from the past. Shiva Mehta is back with the second season of Smile India. The show is available in both English and Hindi. On this episode, she talks about the conversion from bag teas to bagless ones and how we should ditch the plastic and have a great tea experience. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Whether you're an established sports person or a budding one, or simply a sports enthusiast, join us, Tanvi and Shlok.
We are 2 passionate pro badminton players talking policy, mindset and everything sport.
So tune in to The Millennial Athlete every Monday.
Only on the IVM Podcast Network.
Trust us, it's gonna be lit.